Welcome to my presentation on gesture analysis of violin bow strokes. What is music-related gestures? In music, gesture is any movement, either physical or mental. This gesture includes both characteristic physical movements by performers and characteristic melodies. There are three types of music-related gestures. There are sound-producing gestures, which has two levels to it. Excitation gestures, which is direct, plucking of strings, hitting bongos. Indirect, bowing, piano, key mechanism. And also modification gestures, which is muting, string bending, and vibrating bar. This is the gesture I'm focusing on. There's also sound facilitation gestures, the indirect motion of the body that enables the production of a sound and may also affect it. And finally, communication gestures, the communicating with other performers and also the conductor. My chosen report is Gesture Analysis of Violin Bow Strokes by Nicholas H. Rashamina, Emmanuel Fleety, and Frederick Bevelier, created in 2005. My report overview. The report's linear discriminant analysis has been performed to estimate a minimum number of pertinent features necessary to model these bow stroke classes. A linear discriminant analysis, also known as LDA, is used here to reduce the number of features to a more manageable number before the process of classification. Moving on, they found that the maximum and minimum accelerations of a given stroke were efficient to parameterize the different bow stroke types, as well as differences in dynamics of playing. For the research of this report, they developed an acoustic instrument with added gestures, capture capabilities to control the electronic processes. They report that the gesture analysis they performed on three different bow strokes, Dittachi, Martelli, and Spiccato, using the augmented violin. Dittachi is a playing technique on the violin and other string instruments that calls for broad but separate bow strokes. In printed sheets, the notes simply are not slurred. Sonically, Dittachi achieves a medium balance between the fluid legato technique and the jaunty staccato technique. Martelli is a playing technique on a violin and other string instruments that calls for each successive note to be isolated within its own bow stroke. Often you lose large and very rapid bow strokes. And finally, spiccato is a string technique involving detached notes played by a bouncing bow. The bow comes off the strings. Much like the Dittachi technique, it involves alternating bow strokes, an up bow followed by down bow followed by an up bow, etc. But the bow bounces off the strings for each note. Moving on. Different features based on the velocity and acceleration were considered. Recognition rates were estimated using the KN method and various training sets. The KNN method works by finding the distances between a query and all the examples in the data, selecting the specified number of examples closest to the query, then votes for the most frequent label of the average labels. Finally, they discussed the bow stroke recognition allowed to relate to the gestured data to music notation. While the bow stroke continuously parameterization can be related to continuous sound characteristics. Positive and negatives of the report. The positives I found of the report were the research method were thorough and allowed for a large variety of results to evaluate and to conclude upon. The results allow you to follow what bow gestures are most effective for the violinist. However, I did notice one big negative of the research paper, that being the research that was conducted. They used two violinists that were very high standard, however, they played differently and neither of them were consistent. This would have played a large part in the final outcome of the results and data, making an unfair test. How does the report link to my project? I'm linking the report to my mini project 2, as in the project I use multiple different techniques and methods to gain different frequency of sound and also visual, but that doesn't quite link in. The report studies different techniques of movement to gain a variety of different sounds and frequencies from a violin. In my project, I use a slide potentiometer to change the frequency and volume of the music being played. On top of that, I use input of a motion sensor to change the frequency of the sound being projected, which links with the report as they use different methods/inputs to create a different sound and frequency. Reflection on my work. In my project, I use three methods of modification gestures: the slide potentiometer, the motion sensor, and the mute button. These generate an experience that I was happy with due to the lack of my knowledge and create simple sound gestures. On reflection to the project, I feel I could have used more methods such as short flex sensor, which could have acted as a string and generated different frequency depending on how much flex or pressure is applied.